9 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few tight ends I would bench this week. The first guy, Tyler Higbee of the Los Angeles Rams. Tyler Higbee, it's been up and down for him this season, but he's only had one double-digit fantasy day this season in PPR leagues, and that was Week 3 versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the last few weeks here for Higbee. Week 6 at the Giants, 5 catches, 36 yards. Week 7 versus Detroit, 5 catches, 46 yards. Week 8 at the Houston Texans, 3 catches, 25 yards. So this week here in Week 9 versus the Tennessee Titans, they give up the 6th least amount of fantasy points to tight ends. And right here, Tyler Higbee, I know he's a pretty good tight end this season, and it's a very weak position, no doubt about it. But this week, I don't see him producing big numbers once again. I think it's going to be more Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, and Darrell Henderson and some Von Jefferson mixed in this ball game. So right here, if you got better options at tight end, or you just don't have high hopes for Higbee, I think he's a guy you definitely could bench this week, and you won't miss out. The second tight end I would bench this week, Dan Arnold, the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Dan Arnold was a hot pickup on the waiver wire this week, added in 12% of fantasy leagues. But this week, I don't see him doing much in a tough matchup versus the Buffalo Bills. And I think a lot of guys are going to struggle in this game. And I've mentioned to bench a few Jacksonville Jaguars players because the Bills here, one of the best defenses in all of football. And right here, tight ends have the 7th least amount of fantasy points versus the Bills on the season. And Arnold, he's been pretty solid for this Jacksonville Jaguar team since they traded for him a few weeks back. Week 5 versus Tennessee, 6 catches, 64 yards, and a fumble loss. Week 6 versus Miami, 2 catches, 27 yards. And then Week 8 at Seattle, he had a nice ball game, 8 catches, 68 yards. But this week, I don't think the production will be there. And he's a player this week I could sit on the bench and not have to worry. And I would bench this week Evan Engram of the New York Giants. So it's been good to see Evan Engram have back-to-back double-digit fantasy days, but right here he wasn't traded at the deadline like many people thought he would, and not a lot of activity went on the NFL trade deadline. It was more just defensive players getting traded around the league. But anyway, the last couple games for Engram, like I mentioned, Week 7 versus Carolina, 6 catches, 44 yards. And Week 8 at Kansas City, 3 catches, 15 yards, and the touchdown bailed them out. So the thing here with Engram, he's not really having many receiving yards. Daniel Jones, don't look for him that much, in my opinion, even though the last couple games, the volume's been there with him more. And I know the Vegas Raiders give up the 5th most fantasy points to tight ends, but now with people expecting Engram to do something good this week, these are the weeks where he usually has a down ball game and doesn't live up to it. So Engram has a couple good games. People then pick him up the wire and expect him to have good production, but this week I just don't see it happening for the 3rd week in a row, and he's a tight end to bench this week. So that's a few tight ends I will bench here in Week 9 of the fantasy football season.